Welcome to episode 472. Today, we talk about Mike Cosper's recent interview with Joshua Harris, the former megachurch pastor and evangelical wunderkind who became the poster child for the purity movement back in the 1990s with his book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Harris has since left his wife and renounced his faith. What does his story tell us about the evangelical subculture? Then, strange things are happening at John Piper's church in Minneapolis, where leaders are clashing over issues of race and abuse, and some pastors are resigning after being accused of, quote, the sin of empathy, end quote. Then I talk with my friends Jamin Goggin and Kyle Strobel about revisions to their 2017 book, The Way of the Dragon or The Way of the Lamb. They decided to pull the book from publication and rewrite it because it turns out one of the Christian leaders they had celebrated as a lamb turned out to be a dragon, and they have wisdom to share about that experience. All of that, plus scientists are making mini brains from stem cells, but to their surprise, the brains have grown their own eyes, leading Phil to ask, what could possibly go wrong? Before we jump into the episode, a brief scheduling update. The next Holy Post live stream with me, Phil, and Christian is all set for September 28th at 8 p.m. Central Time. It's an opportunity to hang out with us live via YouTube and ask questions, and if you're lucky, Phil might just bring his ukulele. Access to these live stream events are exclusively for Holy Post Patreon supporters, so if you've not yet signed up, head over to holypost.com and click the Support Us button. That way you'll get access to all the bonus interviews, merchandise, and you'll be able to join us at 8 p.m. on September 28th for the next live stream event. Okay, here's today's show.
Hey there, welcome back to the show. This is Phil Vicious. This is the Holy Post Podcast. I am here with Sky Jitani.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Sky. You're still wearing the same hat.
I am wearing the same
Miami of Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go, what's the fight song? Go, what are they, the Eagles?
No, Red Hawks.
Go, Red Hawks, go, Red Hawks. No, we're not in Florida. Is that the theme song?
Something like that.
Okay.
The motto is love and honor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Love and honor?
Yeah. The school's over 200 years old, you know.
Yeah,
We're not some startup.
Whee! Okay. And Christian Taylor. Hi, Christian. How you doing?
Hey, Phil. Good. How are you?
Good. Glad to have you back. And Jason Rugg, king of all cinnamon rolls. Hi, Jason. You went to Cinnaholic in the last week, right?
Yeah, I did.
I saw
With
a
my
picture.
cousin and my aunt. It was
Your
amazing.
cousin and your aunt. Yeah. Yeah. They said, Jason, take us to the best place in Chicago for food.
My cousin actually was over there and was like, I'm going to Cinnaholic. You better meet me here.
Oh.
so I went to the car, went over. I had the s'mores cinnamon roll, which was I'd never had before. It was.
They've gone Oreos on us.
They have all sorts of toppings and things. You can get one with fresh fruit and that sort of thing. My cousin had something, I don't know what it was, but it had purple frosting on it, and she said it was a bit much. So yeah.
Where is Cinnaholic again?
It's downtown Naperville.
Oh, I gotta go there. I haven't been there yet. It's not that far away from me.
I just can't. I can't walk into any establishment with sin in the name.
I know. It sounds like the worst brothel in Vegas.
And it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. Okay, Christian Taylor. We haven't gotten an update from a while about your little movie, The Little Movie That Could, The Girl Who Wore Freedom, the documentary about the liberation of France and the relationship between the American GIs and the French natives, half of whom are staying in your house now. So what's the latest? What's going on?
Oh my goodness, you can actually repeat all that stuff. It looks like you've been listening to me. I can't believe it. I'm shocked. And thank you very much for asking me. It's been an exciting couple of weeks because I think I told you guys a month ago we were out on Delta. So
airlines.
Yeah, Delta Airlines,
not the
virus.
Variant. Our movie now comes with the new virus.
Well, when you say we're out on Delta, it means like we've shut down production because of Delta.
Yes. Thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying, gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're on Delta Airlines, and so a lot of people have been tweeting us, Facebooking, and Instagramming us pictures of themselves on airplanes with the movie. I've actually had people writing me and saying, "I want to buy $1,000 worth of DVDs. Where
Wow.
can I?" It's just I never anticipated that much viewership,
Exposure. Yeah.
exposure from Delta Airlines, but we're one of a top 4 or 5 movies that are spotlighted when you sit down on the film, and I think are on the plane, and I think that makes a difference. So that was really cool. And then this week it was announced that we have been selected to screen at the Normandy World War II Film Festival in Normandy on July 5th in 2022. So now is
Very
a
cool.
wonderful time if you want to join us in Normandy to start planning your trip, and you can actually get a free trip if you support the Documentary First podcast on our Patreon page. And our Doc First podcast has been running now for 2.5 years. Jason and Josh Lindsay are on it, so it's a great thing to listen to. So join us over there for a little bit more podcasting fun.
Wow. Awesome.
They're giving away
glad-
free trips, Phil. What should the Holy Post give away?
Yeah.
Like a trip to where?
Cinnaholic? Is that bad?
Listen, let me tell you,
support
people
that.
would pay, I kid you not, they would pay on Patreon to go to Cinnaholic with the 4 of us.
With Jason.
And
Mostly Jason.
definitely with Jason.
With Jason. Definitely
Who
with
puts
Jason.
fruit on a Cinnabon? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That is pretty ridiculous. It
That's
defeats the whole
just-
purpose of eating
it
like
really
the bread
does.
and sugar.
Yeah, you're trying too hard to say, "Oh no, I made it
They're
better."
healthy.
Well,
My
I'm
aunt
not
got one with strawberries and blueberries and stuff all over it, and she tried mine. She goes, "Okay, that's like a lot better."
But yours was the s'mores one.
Yeah.
So it had
What's your
marshmallow
favorite?
on it and chocolate?
Yeah, marshmallow, chocolate.
Well, then it's not a cinnamon roll.
Well, it was a cinnamon roll underneath all that.
Oh, with cinnamon, with everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What is your favorite cinnamon roll there?
Oh man, I've built my own a couple times, and so I've only been like 3 or 4 times.
Wait a
'cause it
second,
opened-
you can
You
build
can-
your own cinnamon roll?
Yeah,
Wait,
you
what
put your
is
own
this?
toppings and everything
Is
on it.
Cold Stone Creamery? What is this?
Yeah.
My
So
God.
cinnamon roll. So they basically what they're saying is the cinnamon roll
Is
is the
the bowl.
delivery system for
Yeah, that's the base.
everything else that you want to shove in your body.
It's just a
Yeah,
palette.
You get a plain one if you want to be a loser.
Do they have mochi? Can I put mochi on my cinnamon roll?
There's a mochi place like right across the street and down a little bit. So
Okay.
What about boba? I love boba.
Yeah,
Do they put
boba.
boba?
Mm.
I don't think there's
No.
any bobas.
No.
Okay.
Let's start our own cinnamon roll shop and we'll add those.
Maybe we should start the show. Sky, do you have something to say? You're definitely chewing on something.
No, I'm just waiting for the show to start.
Okay. Do you remember I started a new thing a few weeks ago? It's the Bureau of What Could Possibly Go Wrong. Remember that bureau?
Yeah.
Yes.
Needs a
I don't
theme
have a
song.
theme song yet. I need to do a theme song for it. I don't have one. I apologize. Said, what could possibly go wrong? Scientists grow stem cell mini brains. Then the brains sort of developed eyes.
Stop it.
Isn't that like a villain from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or it's just
Yes.
a brain with?
That was
It
that
was-
Crane? It was
Slasher, Snacker,
No.
Snapper. Let's say
No.
something that's completely wrong and then not correct it and see how many people correct it for us.
That
And
was a
even though we did
fiasco.
correct it, they still corrected us for
Yes,
it.
we did correct it
it
later
was
on.
cranium. It was cranium something or
It's
other.
a pinky in the brain. Mini brains grown in a lab from stem cells. You had me right there. Mini brains. Isn't that's a new cereal from Kellogg's? Kellogg's Mini Frosted Brains. Mini brains grown in a lab from stem cells have spontaneously developed rudimentary eye structures, scientists report in a fascinating new paper that should terrify every living human.
Did you say that, or is that in the article?
I added that. On tiny human-derived brain organoids. Do you know what an organoid is?
Well, I do now. It's a little brain stem cell
It's
product.
when you use stem cells to convert themselves into a particular type of organ cell, like a liver cell or a lung cell, and it just grows to make a little kind of non-functioning clump of that type of cells. But you can use them for certain tests. If you want to test how a lung would react to a drug, or a liver cells would react to a chemotherapy treatment or something, you can grow mini organs that are just clumps that don't have everything they need to function. So why not start growing human brains? What could possibly go wrong? I know. Yes.
Here's what can go
Jason,
wrong is there's a DC Comics villain that's just known as the Brain. He's a supervillain, a
Yeah.
mad scientist of French descent. And he's little more than a brain in a jar. But he's a supervillain in the DC, and he's French. So I think that's what could go wrong.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
what could go wrong.
So
although I like French
they
people.
They
They're
did
nice.
not tell these mini brains, they did not tell them, hey, some of
Don't
you
grow
cells
eyes.
turn into eyes. They just did. I'm just going to let that sit.
No, they said they said, now you're like being hyper, I don't know what it is, but you are.
Yeah, I made a hyperbole.
Yeah, that's it. Because they are eye structures.
Yeah,
They are not eyes.
On tiny human-derived brain organoids grown in dishes, 2 bilaterally symmetrical optic cups were seen to grow. What do you have on your face? Remember, kids, what do you have on your face? No, those aren't your eyes. Those are your bilaterally symmetrical optic cups. Which was also the first attempt at a bra, mirroring the development of eye structures in human embryos. This incredible result will help us to better understand the process of eye differentiation and development, as well as eye diseases.
So is
Our
this
work highlights...
are they saying this is why we should do this? This is the good reason that we should do this? Is this bolstering their argument for why they should make tiny brains?
I think so. Our work highlights the remarkable ability of brain organoids to generate primitive sensory structures that are light sensitive and harbor cell types similar to those found in the body, said, guess where this research is happening?
France.
Germany. Germany.
Look
says
at this.
Neuroscientist J. Gopalakrishnan of University Hospital Dusseldorf. These organoids can help to study the brain-eye interactions during embryo development, model congenital retinal disorders, and generate patient-specific retinal cell types for personalized drug testing and transplantation therapies, and to create a superior race of human soldiers.
Okay.
How did you drift into Scottish at the end there?
I don't know what happened.
I was going to say the same thing, Jason. There was a little Scottish in there.
I came untethered. That's all I can say.
If they let these continue to grow,
they take over
the... Like, how big can these things get?
Size of a puppy! Little puppies with eye cups.
It's very creepy.
That is creepy.
Brain organoids.
Go ahead.
Brain organoids are not true brains, as you might be thinking of them. They are small three-dimensional structures grown from induced pluripotent stem cells harvested from adult humans and reverse engineered into stem cells that have the potential to grow into many different types of tissue. But what if the brain cells, the brain organoids, get a hold of the mechanisms to direct other stem cells to grow into different things? They will start assembling their own bodies.
Are you making this up? Is that your hypothesis?
Yes, that's my hypothesis. Yes, that's my hypothesis.
You're catastrophizing. Although I will say that man can justify anything. Because when you read that, it sounds like, oh, yeah, making tiny brains with eyes are not so bad.
Deal. Yeah, it's no big deal. We do it all the time. That's my sister. She started that way. She was an organoid. And she grew eyes.
The Brain in the DC Comics universe is the leader of the Brotherhood of Evil. He's a massive genius-level intelligence with the powers of strategy, durability, and advanced technology. His hobby is playing chess with his lover and spending time with leading the... Yeah, so, I mean, this is not good. I don't think you should just be making brains in jars with eyeballs.
He keeps staring at me with his eye cups. I don't like it.
Do you have a picture of these brains with eye cups?
Yes, they do have.
How do I find that?
Just Google, everyone, scientists grow stem cell mini brains, and then it'll come up.
That's what it is.
No, that's not it, Sky.
Yeah, it is. That's
not
it. Anybody who's watching
that's
this on
the
YouTube,
villain.
that's what they're making.
Wait, Sky, did I miss something I was Googling? What did I miss?
You missed this.
Show me again.
Look.
Yeah,
It's a brain
he's
in a
showing
jar.
Comic book brain villain. Not the same. Okay, I got to move on.
I see it. They look like tadpoles.
Or chocolate chip cookies, kind of, before you make them.
Okay,
without tails.
They look like Oreos. They look like lemon Oreos that got a little bit of chocolate chips mixed in.
Yeah, like two bilaterally symmetrical chocolate chips. Those are their symmetrical optic cups. Oh my goodness. Eureka!
Is wild.
It's alive.
And
Okay,
those
I gotta
optic
move
cups
on.
look a little bit more like eyes. Now I'll give you a little bit of grace there. I thought they were like stems that came off the brain that had
no.
cups on them.
No. If you saw one of those things staring at you, you'd say, it's looking at me.
You know
I don't know what it is, but it's looking at me.
When you described it before looking at the picture, it reminded me of the snail in SpongeBob.
Gary?
Oh, yeah, no, it's not.
Gary.
It's
Yeah,
not
you know
that.
the eyes of Gary?
An optic cup is not an optic stem. Okay,
Wait,
we need to talk about
is
Josh.
this the picture you guys are all looking at?
Yes.
Yes, that's it.
Yes.
That looks evil.
I really feel bad
it's-
for people that are just listening to this podcast. I'm telling you,
coming to
if you're
get ya.
not- if
Google
you're not
it.
watching it on YouTube, you really are missing out.
Google it. Okay, we need to talk about Josh Harris. You know who Josh Harris
Please.
is?
I do. He was the
Yeah.
guy that wrote a book on sexual purity before he was married.
He was a
Then
teenager.
he got
He was
married.
still a teenager.
He was still a
He
teenager.
taught us all how to be sexually pure while he was a teenager.
Right.
He wrote Kiss Dating Goodbye, or Why I
Right.
Kiss Dating Goodbye. Yes. So this was in the 90s. I was too old to be impacted by it. And my kids were too young for me to care about it. So I didn't pay any attention. I heard about it. And I remember just thinking, wait, we're not supposed to date anymore? Dating's bad now?
I was a college student
And-
when that came out, so I had some kind of peripheral.
Well-
were you aware of it?
I never read it. I was aware of it for sure, but it was mostly, I think I just missed it. Had I been a high school student, it probably would have been a bigger deal.
Yeah.
Well, and I kissed dating goodbye after I read Elizabeth Elliot's Passion and Purity. That was like
Oh.
the purity culture book of our generation,
Right.
Phil, which I'm sure you probably didn't read, but boy, was I inculcated with it.
No, I did not read that. So Josh Harris Josh Harris.
He's not Jewish. He's
Harris.
Harris.
Harris, as a teenager, became a best-selling author and Christian celebrity, conservative Christian celebrity. He was homeschooled, K through 12, never went to college, became a pastor by the time in his early 20s, pastored a church until his, I think, mid-30s, never having gone to seminary or school for anything, started a whole movement, and then decided he'd made a terrible mistake.
But that was
And
after he
started
was married.
Oh yes,
right?
This is way later. This is after he'd been a pastor for like 10 years.
Right.
Started meeting people that were harmed by his book and purity culture. So as people started to critique evangelical purity culture, a lot of them said, yeah, and it was that book. What was that book? Oh yeah, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. It was that book by Josh Harris. That's the one that messed me up. And he ended up stepping down as a pastor, kind of recanted his book, asked the publishers to stop publishing the book, enrolled in seminary, moved to Vancouver, enrolled in Regent Seminary. And as he was going through seminary, started participating in a documentary to kind of unravel the purity movement. And shortly after they finished the documentary, announced that he and his wife were divorcing, and about 2 weeks after that, announced that he was no longer a Christian. He just went from the wunderkind of young evangelical Christian authors and celebrities to I'm completely out. He was in the news again 2 weeks ago when he launched a course called Reframe Your Story, which was a 5-week course on religious trauma recovery and leaving Christianity, which he was charging $275. So if you want to leave Christianity, it'll cost you $275. Although you could get it for free if you had been damaged by his books in the past. You could get the course for free.
In other words, you've already paid enough.
Yes, you've already paid. This was not responded to well by particularly the ex-vangelicals community and the kind of those that are, trying to help other people recover from sexual trauma within the church or spiritual abuse within the church, to see this guy who many of them claimed you were responsible for some of the trauma that we experienced in the church, and now you're trying to make money off of people who were traumatized by what you did in the church. So the course was available for a week, and then he pulled it and took it all down. And this was interesting. I don't know if you're listening to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, the podcast. Last week's episode was all about Josh Harris and his rise and fall, including extensive interviews with Josh Harris, which are very interesting and worth listening to. And the interviews were done right. Mike Cosper, who was on the show 2 weeks ago, interviewed Josh Harris several times. One was right after this course came out and right before the course came down, which led him to wonder a little bit if their conversations might have had a little part in that happening. Sky?
There's a lot to unpack here. A lot.
We've talked about purity culture, so that's not what the story is about.
That's not the story.
Well,
I think John, go ahead, Christian.
Well, I was just going to say, one thing I read in that article that I thought was particularly problematic was where he co-opted other people's work into the course and basically didn't talk to them about it. He's just like, I'm going to include your work in my course, didn't talk to them, and wasn't sharing any revenue with them.
Yeah, it's not quite as bad as that, because he listed other people's resources on his resource guide. So he wasn't giving their stuff away and he wasn't selling their stuff. He was just linking to their stuff, but without them knowing about it. And he was using it as a tool to get email addresses for marketing purposes.
Right, that's what it was.
So other people felt, wait, you're using my story to get email addresses to market to for your course. I don't like that.
Right.
Okay. Can we back up the truck a little bit here?
Yeah.
Because I think Josh Harris...
That means doesn't that mean you're going to dump a whole lot on us when you back up the truck?
I think Josh Harris is a really interesting microcosm of just the evangelical phenomenon, right? And let's look at what he represents.
Unpack it.
Okay, first of all, he's a teenager and he writes a book, and the evangelical industrial complex goes, you know what? This is fantastic. Let's give him a publishing deal and give him a platform to sell millions and millions and millions of books, even though he has no experience or expertise in the topic he's talking about at all, right? Then after that, he has
But they liked the topip and they thought it was going...
That seems like a good idea. Doesn't that seem like a good idea?
All right, wait, but...
the thing is, they liked his message, and let's think about this for a second. These are adults. They want to have control over their kids, and they're thinking, oh, this is a great way to put this in the hands of the youth. Maybe it will shape the minds of the youth.
Yeah, but why couldn't you get a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old who has some biblical knowledge, wisdom, and experience, or maybe even a counseling degree to write that same message?
Yeah.
Right? But
Henry Cloud. Why don't you get Henry Cloud to write the book?
Let me ask you, you guys have teenagers. Who are your teenagers going to listen to?
Okay, Christian,
are they going to listen to Henry Cloud?
But this is the point, is evangelicalism, we talked about it last week, doesn't care about expertise or knowledge. It cares about popularity. And this kid he's a teenager, and he writes a book and he makes millions of dollars communicating a message that is unbiblical and ill-conceived, okay? Does enormous amount of harm and damage to people, which he doesn't know at the time, but he figures out decades later. Then he doesn't go to seminary.
Wait, are you saying not dating? Are you saying not dating is explicitly unbiblical?
No, I'm saying that claiming his model of of marriage and courtship is biblical is unbiblical.
Oh, okay.
What he's
Okay.
advocating as the
Okay.
biblical
That's a
model
nuance.
is not the biblical
It's
model,
a
right?
nuance. It is unbiblical for you to say that this is biblical.
That's
Okay,
right.
I'm
Okay,
with you.
then after that, he doesn't go to college, he doesn't go to seminary, but he becomes the leader of one of the most influential megachurches in the country,
Mm-hmm.
right? Again, no training,
Sounds like a good plan.
no expertise, and he's given
Because Sky, in America, anyone can make it big. We don't
clearly.
like it that you have to go through training or education or gatekeepers. I'm doing
Right.
lots of aggressive
Well,
air
but
quotes
the
if you're
thing
watching
is,
on YouTube.
that's the problem here is he did have gatekeepers. There were publishers who were the gatekeepers with the book. There were church leaders who were gatekeepers and giving him access to that platform of that senior pastor. There were gatekeepers. They didn't care
And
about
they saw a
education
rock star
or
in the making.
exactly. And so then he finds himself leading this congregation. And based on the interview I heard with Mike Cosper, to his credit, when various allegations started coming out about sexual abuse in that church, he made mistakes, but he didn't make as
It was
drastic.
in yeah.
Like
Yeah, he wasn't involved in
right. He was
anything
struggling to
bad.
figure
It
out what
was
to do in
it
this
was
thing.
the parent church.
But the point is, he gets to this point in his life, I don't know how old he was, maybe 40, where not only is he questioning the book he wrote as a teenager, but he ends up questioning everything about the Christian faith. And clearly, if his marriage failed, there were other issues going on there. I have no idea where fault or culpability lies. I'm not even going to do that. But this is somebody who clearly didn't have their life, their faith, their theology, or their maturity to handle the level of leadership he was given. And I don't blame
Yep.
Josh Harris at all for any of this. I blame the evangelical subculture that put this poor young kid in the circumstances where he couldn't even figure out what he really believed before he's leading a megachurch. That's
So
the problem here. This is not
tell me,
about Josh Harris. This is about us.
tell me, Sky.
Amen.
Did you ever cover him at Christianity Today?
I never did, but I'm sure other people
Was
did.
he on your list?
No, he was not on my list. And he
Okay.
wasn't like I was the managing editor for Leadership Journal, which is for pastors and church leaders. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, Josh Harris never was on my radar for stuff there. But I feel like his story is a tragic story. And probably that for his wife and his kids is a tragic story of the evangelical industrial complex pushing somebody into greater and greater authority because it made sense for the marketplace, even if his faith and soul and maturity and relational capacity couldn't handle it. And that's the warning I think we need to take from his story.
Right.
And then the last bit then is when he does leave the faith and he goes and does this ex-vangelicals thing, it's interesting that the one strategy he seeks to employ, which is let's create a product that I can sell
It's
to people.
commercialism.
It's the same commercialism that built him in evangelicalism. He then carries into the post-evangelical world.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, he learned the exact wrong lesson from it.
Well,
When
you think about it,
yeah.
if you think about the parent-child relationship, look at this. Okay, he was a child at the time. The parent in his life was this big evangelical industrial complex, right? And so they're shaping and forming him, his ideas about money, his ideas about relationships, ideas about how to run a business, right? So of course, when all of that falls away and they, really in some senses, they abused him. They abused him and kind of used him in a sense. And so of course, his faith is deconstructed. So now all he knows when he goes out on his own to try to reconstruct his life again is what he learned from his quote unquote parent.
But
Right.
I mean, he could have taken the tact of saying, you know what, I've been through this whole season. I'm rethinking everything. His marriage is over. His faith is over. He could have taken years, perhaps, to really do a deep dive into his own faith or lack thereof, his own beliefs, his own values. And then maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years, he comes out of that and says, you know what, I have been through a really difficult, fascinating journey. And I now have enough wisdom to help other people on that journey too. But what he does is he's out for like 18 months and he goes, okay, I've got enough now. I can market this. I can sell it. And that's so EIC, evangelical industrial complex way of thinking, which is what got him into the mess in the first place.
That's heartbreaking.
Right. Emily Joy Allison, who wrote the book, How Purity Culture Upholds Abuse said this of Harris, said he wrote a book about how to have a good marriage when he was single and 21. He was a pastor without ever having gone to seminary, and now he's trying to do deconstruction work when he just got out of Christianity.
Bingo.
His entire life has been a story about doing SHIT that he is not qualified for and harming people in the process. But we love if it's a hot, good-looking kid, we can put him up in front at youth conferences and sell tickets to youth conferences because they'd rather listen to him than an old guy, than Josh McDowell when he's in his 70s. We need a young, cute one that they would put on, MTV.
Right.
Right.
So let me ask you something. Instead of just sitting on the sidelines and playing Sunday afternoon quarterback, what are we supposed?
Christian. Yeah, Christian. What are you going to do about it, Christian?
Yeah. What are we supposed to take away from observing this? Like, what do we want our listeners to think as we're processing this story? Is it that we shouldn't be buying what the evangelical industrial complex is selling? Is it, what is the takeaway?
One of the pieces of advice I give people all the time when this kind of stuff comes up is I always say, read dead people. Or if they're not dead, they should be close.
Like
read
my
people.
dog buddy.
Oh gosh. If he wrote a book, I would have read it.
Did he write something? Me
but
too.
If someone's been dead for a while and their book is still being read, and I'm talking about like in the Christian realm, it probably has some enduring truth that is worth reading. But if something came out last year and it's a hot selling item, is it okay? Maybe there's something good there. Maybe there isn't. But use time as a test to determine whether something has enduring value. I'm not saying you never read current authors. We have many of them on our show, and I interview them because I think some of their writing is great and worthwhile. But if you're never reading the old stuff to gain that well of wisdom that the church has developed over 2,000 years, you're not going to have the wisdom to discern what the good stuff is that's being produced now. So yeah, read broadly, read dead people, and make, for every 2 or 3 books you read that are old and valuable, read one that might be more recent.
It is.
Thank you for that practical application,
that
Sky.
was very practical and applicable. It is amazing how much we've grown in conservative Christian circles to mistrust the academy. So we don't care if anyone has any credentials, any educational credentials whatsoever, before we put them up on a pedestal. But just say, okay, yeah, there are problems with public education. There are problems in the academy. But there's still a whole body of scholarship in almost every topic field that is beneficial in some way, and if you've never been in a classroom and never been on a college campus and never been in a seminary, it's like there's a red flag there that you're an expert in a topic.
Totally.
Like me, for example, I have 3 semesters of Bible college, so you should be listening to everything that I say. Okay, one more story before we have to go.
Hold on, before you do that, you're telling me this guy's not evil? Come on. He's waiting to take over the world.
Pinky and the Brain. What's the theme song from Pinky and the Brain?
Pinky and the Brain.
Yeah, he wants to take over the world. Okay, you got to go to the YouTube to see what Sky just did because he drew a face on our organoid.
Does that mean he wasn't really listening?
I was totally listening.
Conversation.
I don't know when he did that, but maybe it just happened. Maybe that's just the next level of organoid self-development. Is first he grew optic cups, and now he has eyebrows that are angry. That's not a good sign. If he had happy eyebrows, it'd probably be okay. Okay. Something's going on. Do you know, are you familiar with Bethlehem Baptist Church? Christian, do you know Bethlehem Baptist Church?
Well, I do now after this article that I just read. And I just have to say one thing before you dive into this. It is complicated to understand this very thin line between the two sides in this article. So
yeah,
I look forward to you unpacking this.
It's a bit of a tough one. If you're not familiar, Bethlehem Baptist Church is a 150-year-old Minneapolis church, best known for for 33 years as the home church of John Piper, one of, I would say, would you say, Sky, 10 most influential pastors of the last generation or so?
I'd probably put him in the top 5.
Whoa, that's okay.
Yeah.
Very influential pastor, particularly influential in the young, restless, and reformed movement, which we've never really covered that. Like, do a podcast episode to explain the young, restless, and reformed movement. Also extremely influential in the development of complementarianism as we know it today, and the co-founder of the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood with Wayne Grudem, who we've mentioned on the podcast numerous times. And was he a founding member of the Gospel Coalition? He's like done all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
He's everywhere.
He's, like I said, he's very influential.
Very influential. His church has a bit of a I don't know, for kerfuffle. I think it's a kerfuffle. Bethlehem Baptist Leaders clash over, quote, coddling and, quote, cancel culture, including the departure of his successor pastor has left the church, and 2 other pastors left the church. 3 pastors and a staff member resigned from the downtown campus of Bethlehem Baptist Church in Minneapolis in recent months, alongside dozens of lay members. Another 4 faculty and staff left the college. They have their own seminary and seminary in the past year, including Jason Meyer, Piper's successor and Bethlehem's pastor for preaching and vision. Some of the issues that have divided Bethlehem, many of which are straining other conservative churches too, are issues about racial justice and critical race theory, the Me Too movement and the call to believe women, and the nature of trauma and abuse. At its heart are questions over whether, when, and how Christians can challenge those who say they are hurting. So part of it comes back to someone's claim that these 3 are no longer with the church because they were too empathetic. And there is a view being circulated that the college and seminary has a new president, Joe Rigney, who is circulating the idea of somewhat controversial idea about the sin of empathy, that sympathy is biblical, empathy is not biblical.
What?
And that in the Me Too movement and in the Black Lives Matter movement, people are throwing away biblical sympathy for unbiblical empathy. That's a fun theory.
This is how far off the rails sections of American Christianity have gone that they have actually argued that empathy is sinful.
Oh, come on, Sky. Come on, Sky.
It's insane.
You might be saying friends at home and tiny developing organoid brains. You might be saying while you sit at home, what is the difference between sympathy and empathy? I'm not even sure I can articulate it. Okay, let me help you out. According to the dictionary, sympathy is feelings of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune. You see someone in a bad way and you feel for them. I feel for you. I have sympathy. Okay. It's related to Christian compassion. I have compassion for you. Empathy, dictionary definition is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Okay. Oh, I will share in your feelings with you. So here's the critique from Joe Rigney, the new head of John Piper's seminary. When you have compassion, you are suffering with someone. If you have empathy, you are suffering in. You are jumping. So they are in quicksand and you are jumping into the quicksand with them. Once you've done that, you lose contact with truth. You lose the ability to judge. So and he sees that.
Hold on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You're in the quicksand, Sky. You're going down with them.
When Jesus
That's not helpful.
When Jesus took on flesh and became human and dwelt with us and shared in our afflictions and struggles and was tempted in every way as we are, though without sin, was he being sympathetic or empathetic?
He could do that because
fully
he was God.
In our humanity.
Yeah, but he didn't lose touch with the truth. Because
that's a different thing. Being empathetic doesn't mean you're losing touch with the truth. This is the jump this is the problem. This is the core problem with his argument. It's sort of like saying anger in and of itself is sinful. It's not. Anger is just an emotion. What you do
Mm-hmm.
with that anger may be
Mm-hmm.
righteous or sinful. Likewise,
Yes.
empathy is just a feeling. It's a feeling of sharing in someone's suffering and pain. What you do with that should be guided by truth. So, but his argument that empathy in and of itself is sinful is insane.
If you have empathy, you lose contact with the ability to judge. You give up the ability to judge, and you allow someone to be a victim even if they're really not. That's the argument.
That
So,
there's no evidence of that.
and of course it comes up with, the Black Lives Matter movement, where suddenly everyone's a victim, everyone's oppressed, or you're an oppressor. And this is a quote from Rigney. I only feel love if you endorse or validate everything I say. So that's what he's saying empathy is: endorsing or validating everything a victim says.
Okay. I think he and they are identifying a legitimate concern in the culture, which is sort of, and they mention this in the article. It's um, it's what Jonathan Haidt talks about with the coddling of the American mind and the
Yes.
snowflake
Yes.
generation, and everyone's a
The
victim.
teaching
Right.
the teaching pastor who quit said he was being referred to as a coddler.
Yeah. And I do think that there is some evidence that there are those dynamics in our culture today. But to say then that being empathetic or too empathetic is sinful is a hyper overreaction that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's a little bit like saying, can charity be abused? Of course it can. We all know documented stories of people who abuse the charity of others. Therefore, is charity itself a sin? Of course not. It just means it has to be engaged wisely. That's all this is about. But to say that charity in and of itself is evil or wrong, or you are too charitable, is not godly. That's ridiculous. If people are bending too much to the victimhood culture of our society, and you can argue about where that line is, fine, we need to employ wisdom and truth here. But to argue that empathy itself is the problem is ridiculous.
Here's what I'm confused about, and I think this explains this tiny little line that I feel like people are walking. It feels like to me this group of people that is calling empathy a sin is they've picked a political position, and we talked about this last week. They've picked a political position that, thus and such, let's take critical race theory, for example, is, destroying, America and Christian culture. And so it's bad. And we're going to find a theological reason, to tear it down and to demonstrate why it's bad and why we don't support it. So it looks like they're bending over backwards to try to reinforce a political position with theology.
Yeah, it does. And the fact that they
Though
would even,
they probably argue that the other side is doing the exact same thing.
and they might be, but the idea that you would juxtapose empathy as an enemy of truth is, I keep saying it's insane, but it's unbiblical and it's ridiculous that
All
empathy
right,
is
well,
opposed to truth.
Sky, here's the argument. Okay, the guy who quit, the lead pastor, Piper's replacement, Meyer,
Jason Meyer.
he says the accusations, Jason Meyer says the accusations against him were, number one, that I have subordinated the gospel. Boy, we're not hearing that much these days. Number two, that I empowered victims. I was a coddler. And number three, that I allowed compassion for others to steer and dictate my leadership direction. In a climate of suspicion, he says, compassion can look like coddling. Okay, now one of his biggest critics. Now, what's interesting is he was the senior pastor of the downtown Minneapolis. There are three locations of Bethlehem Baptist Church. One is right in the heart of Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis. So you're right in the middle of Black Lives Matter Central.
Mm-hmm.
All the protests are right around there. They had a pastor there, of diversity, who was working on issues of ethnic and racial reconciliation. Another one who quit over this. So now he's being criticized, in this case, by the pastor of the suburban campus. So you have, an urban suburban conflict here.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
What are you? Yeah. So, and he says, the pastor of the suburban campus says, I believe that the issue isn't whether or not we should show compassion. We should, but whether our compassion will be rooted in the gospel, deployed with discernment and with a willingness to provide correction or rebuke. Says Stephen Lee, pastor of Bethlehem's North Campus. I had a growing concern that compassion that lacks discernment would ultimately and subtly undermine sound doctrine.
What the
And
heck does
how many
that all
times
mean? That doesn't even make sense to me.
Well, okay,
that if you're so
Explain it.
compassionate towards
Explain it.
someone's story, you're so compassionate towards someone's story and someone's emotions that you're not willing to tell them that maybe they're sinful and preach actual sound doctrine.
but that's the part I didn't get about the article. Was there any accusation that any of these three pastors actually did that? Like
No.
if you read that sentence again, Phil, he said that his fear was that compassion would eventually lead to somebody not saying or speaking or preaching the truth. But he doesn't say it actually
Yes.
happened. So Jason Meyer is basically saying, I was run out of the church because I led too compassionately. Heaven forbid we have compassionate pastors in our congregations. Don't you think the Pharisees would have made the same exact accusation of Jesus, that he was too compassionate on people who just needed to be told the truth?
Okay, just remember, this is a key church in the Young, Restless, and Reform movement. It's a key church in the Gospel Coalition movement.
Yep.
Wait, I'm lost.
So
What do you mean by those?
This is a key church in the group it would have been related to Mark Driscoll and Mars Hill before he really flamed out, and then people started distancing themselves. But it's a key church in the movement to make truth and doctrinal purity a primary focus and push against emotionality and touchy-feely and churches becoming too feminine and too men crying and raising their hands in praise to feminine worship songs. So this is part of a movement that, like, when I have people attacking me, they're quite often coming from this movement. And you can tell because they're either quoting, they're quoting R.C. Sproul, or they're quoting John MacArthur, or they're quoting, in some cases, John Piper, except for when he came out against Donald Trump and was, confused everyone who didn't think he would do that. So this is part of a movement. And this is where it gets even thornier. And we have to talk about Doug Wilson a little bit. We haven't talked about Doug Wilson on the podcast. He's a very controversial pastor in Moscow, Idaho, who started his own little world in Moscow, Idaho. People are afraid he's literally trying to take over the town, which is a college town. It's where the University of Idaho is. He's built a church there. He's built schools there. He's built a college there. He's built a seminary there. He is hyper conservative. He is very controversial for his positions on racism and the antebellum South. He wrote a book about slavery with a neo-Confederate apologist, which said one of the benefits of slavery was that the races developed more compassion and affection toward each other than at any other time in human history was in the South during slavery. So he's a very controversial figure. He's friends with John Piper. John Piper has spoken at his events. He's spoken at John Piper's events. And the new head of John Piper's seminary is a student of Doug Wilson. So Doug Wilson is a really controversial, questionable influence. So there's an hour-long video that you can watch called "The Sin of Empathy," which is a conversation between the new president of John Piper's seminary, Joe Rigney, and Doug Wilson, the guy who's the controversial pastor. That's a little bit scary.
It reminds me of the episode I watched on the Rajneeshis. Oh my goodness. Do you remember that?
The what?
The Rajneeshis.
The what?
It was a documentary on Netflix. It was back in the, 80s, where the Rajneeshis from, India came over, and they took over the little town in Oregon and did exactly what Doug Wilson is doing in Idaho. but they were,
Oh, yeah.
Indian.
Okay,
Okay.
to Christian's point earlier there about the politics of this, it's so interesting that empathy is seen as problematic and even downright sinful when empathy is shown towards women who've been abused and people of color who are seeking justice. But I haven't heard anybody say, you know
And
what,
refugees.
right, or immigrants, refugees, things like that. But nobody is saying, hey, you guys are being way too empathetic to the unborn. Right. So it does fall again along these political
Don't
dividing
go there.
lines. These political dividing lines where the issues that my tribe cares about are legitimate and the issues that your tribe cares about are ungodly. And that just stinks to me. It just, you can't, if your argument doesn't apply to your issues, then it can't apply to mine either.
Right. Okay.
So I
So
think,
what do we do with
what
all
do
this information?
well, I think what's
what do
more
we
interesting.
do with all this? What's going on?
I think what's more interesting is not any of the particulars of what's going on at Bethlehem Baptist or even with the Young, Restless, and Reform movement or Doug Wilson or any of these other people. I think what's interesting is this echoes something I've been hearing as I talk to friends around the country. I've had multiple conversations in the last 2 weeks with local church pastors in different parts of the country. I have talked to parachurch ministry leaders in different parts of the country. And this is the battle line that ministries and churches are now facing. And it's between a neo-fundamentalism and a more cosmopolitan and compassionate approach to the faith given the social issues we're addressing. So what I mean is there are certain groups that have a lot of control and authority and money in these ministries that are saying, if you start talking about racism, if you start talking about sexual abuse, if you start talking about issues that we consider to be on the left of the political spectrum, we're going to walk away, we're going to pull our funding, or we're going to fire you. And then there's this younger generation who want to see a gospel and a form of faith that actually touches on these issues and are reading in scripture a more compassionate approach to the victims and those who are hurting. And they want to engage what their ministry environment calls them to engage in. And there's a tension. And this is coming to a breaking point. And it's probably going to affect a lot of even national ministries that we would know the names of. But the divide is coming, the split's happening, and I think Bethlehem Baptist is a little bit of a canary in a coal mine here.
Wow.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's quite a few pastors are looking at the door or wondering if they're going to be shown the door because they're taking positions that are politically or socially uncomfortable for some people in their congregation, but rather than acknowledging that we might have a political disagreement or a social disagreement, they're couching it in you're subverting the gospel.
Right.
And that's exactly what Jason Meyer was accused of subverting the gospel to too much compassion for people that are hurting.
But can I just say one thing?
It's a tough
Can I
one.
just say one thing? This is, like you said, it's a canary in a coal mine. It is so confusing. And the line here, even for me, like I had to read this article several times to try to understand the splitting hairs of this argument. And I do have some sort of education because I listen to you guys and I listen to our podcast. But if I didn't, I could be easily convinced or swayed by that argument that Rigney was making. Because it sounds
Right.
like
Well,
it
it's
has
like
some
the arguments.
credibility.
It's like the arguments against CRT. If you read the arguments against CRT, you say, "Wow, if that's what CRT is, that's terrible," and I'm not for
Right.
that. But then you
Exactly.
need to read the arguments on the other side to say, "Oh, wait, maybe those people are kind of building a straw man enemy out of something that isn't quite what they say it
Yeah.
is." And it sounds like that empathy is being used as a replacement for critical race theory in this case. And we don't want to say that we don't like Black Lives Matter or that we're against critical race theory, even though we are, but we know we have a downtown church with a largely urban population that wouldn't like that very much. But this is sinful empathy. So we're going to find a new name to put on it, and the end result is the same: is that we're going to get a new pastor.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, and I think, Christian, the reason why you find that message so easily acceptable is because there's a grain of truth to it. There is
Right. That's what I'm saying.
there is a coddling going on. There is a victimhood culture going on that does need to be called out in certain circumstances. But to then completely dismiss the Christian call to empathy with those who are hurting, even if even if someone's hurting and they don't recognize how they may be complicit in part of that pain, or if they're misinterpreting something and seeing it as abuse when it wasn't, like, all that requires wisdom and pastoral care and insight. But to say the empathy itself is at fault is is absolutely horrifying, that we would come to a place where one of the most influential Christian churches in the country would be calling empathy sinful. Is I never thought I'd live to see the day where a church would say empathy is sinful. That's like saying grace is ungodly, right? It's just
But
insane
this is, yeah.
that that's the argument that's
And
being constructed.
this is where, this is like the supreme example of how we as sinful humans can justify just about anything. We can take a grain of truth and we can spin it to make sense, sort of. And if we're not super, super careful, we can then buy into that lock, stock, and barrel. And it's gotten very confusing to be a Christian these days. You know, when I was growing up, it was pretty easy to know what a Republican believed, or what a Baptist believed, or what a Catholic believed, and in a sense, who my tribe was. I didn't understand that's what I was doing. But these days, it's so confusing, because even with your own tribe, I don't know. It's hard to be a Christian today. Think about how much news we have to read to find out what the real truth is. Now it's not just in our news, it's even in our Christian churches and in our theologies. What do we
It's
do,
a bit
Phil?
messy.
What do
All
we
we can totally do it. We can totally do it. It requires a lot of wisdom and rational thought to say, okay, let's separate what you're upset about from what is happening here. You know, which part are you upset about? Well, they're teaching CRT. No, it's specifically, let's be specific. What did they say that you found offensive? Or what did they do that you found offensive? And let's take that specific statement or that specific action back to the Bible, rather than putting it under, coming up with a new bucket evil, a bucket evil of, oh, the sin of empathy, or the sin of critical race theory, or the sin of Marxist thought, in the church. No, specifically what thought, specifically what statement. And I've found both sides learn more when you drill down, to the details of what made you upset or uncomfortable in that setting. Let's talk through that. But it's hard work. It's hard work. And some people are already at the end, which is, you're wrong and you need to be canceled for whatever reason,
Yeah.
because you're too liberal or because you're too conservative. And they don't want to take the time to back up and say, okay, what about that on either side was ungodly or unbiblical or was not loving to my neighbor?
Yeah,
Does that
exactly.
make
And
sense?
the call to wisdom is exactly what's needed here. And to argue that only one side suffers from this problem or only the other side, are there people on the left who claim victimhood too quickly? Absolutely. Are there people on the right who claim abuse and victimhood too quickly? Have you been watching the chaos going on over school mandates for masks? If you're telling me having to wear a mask is abuse, then I think the right has some soul searching to do about their coddling as well. On the flip side, does the left cancel people for ridiculous things? Absolutely. But the right is canceling people also. Now, apparently, you can get canceled for being too empathetic. So this is a problem that cuts both ways. But in the Christian community, what we should be doing is honoring and elevating leaders who exhibit real wisdom. And that means, yes, they are able to hold on to the truth of the gospel. And yes, they are also able to deeply empathize with people who are in pain and struggling. That's just Christ-like wisdom. And for any church to say, no, we're all on truth and empathy is a sinful tendency, or we're all about empathy and truth has no place here, they're both equally wrong. So I just feel like over and over and over again, we're setting up these false dichotomies and then condemning the other side and exonerating ourselves. And that is the antithesis of biblical wisdom.
Ooh, mic drop.
Yeah. Conclusion: don't lose your mind. And at the same time, keep your heart. We need both of them, because we can be all
Yes.
heart and no brain, and we can be all theology and right doctrine and no heart, and both are sinful. Okay, thanks for coming along. It was a fun story. If you ever, just several times this week, just when you're nervous about how the world is going, remember there might be a tiny brain staring at you right now.
From Sky's computer,
And
laptop.
Yeah.
we will see you guys next week. Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Let's be honest, there are many parts of the Bible we ignore and topics we just assume don't apply to us anymore. And I'm not just talking about weird Old Testament laws about freckles and shellfish. For example, circumcision is mentioned in 10 New Testament books, including 13 times in the book of Galatians alone. You may assume this is just an ancient religious custom that may have been a big deal in the first century, but has nothing to do with being a Christian in the 21st century. But you'd be wrong. We're starting a new devotional series in With God Daily, tracing the link between circumcision in the ancient world and consumerism in the modern world. We'll explore how we are tempted to think of our faith as simply a brand we display rather than an identity we inhabit. It's going to be a devotional series unlike anything you've seen before. To join the study, you'll want to visit withgoddaily.com and sign up. You'll get the email devotional 5 days a week, plus the audio devotional, and you can download the mobile app for a better user experience and access to the archives. With God Daily is available to anyone who makes a donation of any amount, so go to withgoddaily.com and discover the daily devotional for people who hate daily devotionals. My guests today are my friends Jamin Goggin and Kyle Strobel, the co-authors of The Way of the Dragon or The Way of the Lamb, Searching for Jesus' Path of Power in a Church that has Abandoned It. As you'll hear in our conversation, they're releasing a new edition of the book after discovering one of the leaders they profiled in the first edition wasn't the lamb they had thought he was. The revelation that he'd abused many women was shocking for Goggin and Strobel, sending them on their own journeys of self-reflection and awakening empathy for others who'd been deceived by Christian leaders. Jamin Goggin is a pastor at Mission Hills Church in Southern California, and Kyle Strobel is a professor of spiritual theology and formation at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. One last note. In the show notes, there's a link to order the updated version of their book, as well as a free downloadable discussion guide, so be sure to check that out. Okay, here's my interview with Jamin Goggin and Kyle Strobel. Jamin Goggin and Kyle Strobel, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Hey, Scott, good to be with you, man.
Great to be with you, Scott.
Okay, Kyle, you were on that not that long ago. Jamin, it's been a while, but both of you were last together on this show all the way back in 2017. It's episode 238. And you're here to talk about the same book that we talked about 4 years ago, The Way of the Dragon or The Way of the Lamb. I really want to recommend people go back and listen to that original interview we did and get the book for sure, because I don't think we've ever talked about a book more than once on this show. So the fact that we're talking about it twice speaks to my endorsement of this book as a really valuable resource. Explain why we're back talking about it again.
I thought it was just because you liked it so much.
Oh yeah, just because I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, the themes have come up repeatedly. I do like those, but there's a specific reason why we're back talking about it again. So explain that.
Yeah, no, this has been an interesting kind of story. So actually, Jamin and I had just held our first pastors conference based on the book, and I actually concluded the conference with a talk on how to kind of recognize wolves in sheep's clothing. And that evening, I get a call from Jamin, and he's saying, "Have you looked at Twitter?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, Jean Vanier, who, for those of you who don't know Vanier, he was Henry Nouwen's mentor. He started L'Arche, arguably one of the most important people who ever lived for caring for people with disabilities, and someone we interviewed for our book and presented in our book as a sage in the way of Jesus. It turns out, after his death, revelations came out about his sexual abuse of a series of women under his spiritual care. And so Jamin and I literally sat silently on the phone for probably an hour reading news stories. And I can't even begin to describe what we experienced there, and just trying to think of what do we do? I mean, it's not like we just quoted him in the book. Like we
Right.
presented him as a model of the way of Jesus. And so that Monday morning, that was a Friday evening night, Saturday, we post stuff just kind of explaining to people where we stand on it. And then Monday morning, we asked our publisher to yank our book from print, which was difficult to do, as you could probably imagine, but we couldn't in good conscience leave it out there, particularly with the other people we interviewed, to honor their ministry and their faithfulness. And so we thought, we're going to turn this around. We're going to redo this book. We're going to address, not just get rid of it. There's a temptation that we could just delete this stuff, but we actually want to kind of navigate our own struggle with this. Like, what does it mean to respond faithfully when a kind of hero of the faith fails you? And it's, increasingly becoming an issue that almost every Christian I meet has to now struggle with. And so we thought we would start and do something relatively quickly. It was both much more difficult emotionally to do than we expected. And then a month later, COVID hit. And so actually for us, this has been all of COVID, has been also trying to navigate how do we speak into these kind of situations, and how do we navigate even some of our own struggles with why didn't we catch this? One of the coolest things, if anything, if you can refer to it that way, that has come out of this is really quickly people rallied around us, and that was really touching. And it's funny because I'm not even sure I realized I needed that, but I was surprised. People very quickly said, we don't blame you for this. And I realized that I actually had taken on, like, I immediately kind of had this sense of I should have known, or we should have seen something, or we should have known better. And so a lot of what we do in the new edition is trying to kind of walk people through these sorts of scenarios through our own experience.
Okay, let's back up for a second. First of all, I want to affirm you guys for having the courage to ask your publisher to pull the book from circulation. I mean, no, really, there obviously have been a lot of these horrible stories of celebrity Christian leaders failing spectacularly. And when you have a financial interest in the reputation and ministry of some of those folks, the temptation can creep in to say, well, we can still justify using him or her in the book because of this reason or that. And there are folks who try to do that. But the fact that within a weekend of coming to terms with this story, you said, no, we need to cut this off and work on it and fix it, is the integrity of that is to be applauded. But let's back all the way up, because the first edition of this book came out in 2017, correct?
Yep.
That was before some very high-profile, spectacular scandals hit the newspapers, right? Before the Bill Hybels mess at Willow Creek, before the Ravi Zacharias revelations that came after his passing with his ministry, James McDonald, and there have been many, many, many others. As you were talking about the first edition of this book, and you saw these different stories unfold before you knew about Jean Vanier, how were you? What did that look like for you guys? You were almost prophetic in in what you wrote originally, and one domino after another kept falling. Before you knew about your own proximity to this issue with Jean Vanier, how were you understanding the role of your book in deciphering what was happening in evangelicalism?
Yeah, well, I think your observation is astute, Sky, about kind of what the dominoes that began to fall even in just a few years following the initial release of the book. And I think maybe what would be helpful is just to acknowledge that, of course, while there may have been a kind of a greater intensity of those stories and maybe a higher degree of kind of visibility, one, just because of, the continued development of social media and its use, and I think how those stories make their way out, how quickly they make their way out, and the details that come out. But you've been in ministry and around the evangelical church long enough to know that while there was probably maybe a greater number and a greater intensity of those stories, of course, they actually aren't all that new. And so, in part, the answer would be because these are the kinds of stories that, whether they made it onto kind of Twitter or not 10 years ago, Kyle and I were personally aware of in our own connection to the church and our own experience kind of within evangelicalism. But I think probably more importantly, really the reason why we maybe were kind of ahead of the curve on some of these stories was our focus wasn't so much on the toxic leaders and the kind of failed celebrity pastors, but really our focus was on our own hearts and just kind of recognizing, growing up within the evangelical church, both of us going away to seminary, planning to be really important people in the church, taking seminary classes with kind of grandiosity in our hearts and envisioning ourselves on certain kinds of stages and envisioning ourselves writing certain kinds of books and speaking at certain kinds of conferences. Really what initiated the book for us originally was the Lord's gracious work to kind of expose the truth of our heart, how much of our trajectory in ministry was about us becoming great and us becoming significant and kind of powerful in a certain sense in ministry, and realizing, man, we need to go on a journey with the Lord. And of course, part of that was prayerful, honest self-reflection. But part of that was what initiated kind of the heartbeat of the book, which is we need to go find people who model a different way for us and learn from them. And those who've been faithful in ministry for 50, 60, maybe 70 years, but who seem to have embraced a different way of power that looks a bit more like the way of Jesus as we hear it in the pages of Scripture, but that we recognize in our own hearts, boy, we perhaps haven't been pursuing in many ways. So I guess the fundamental answer to your question would be, what initiated the book was recognizing our own temptations with power and our need to really do something about that.
Okay, I'm glad you turned kind of the lens inward, because as I've been watching some of these stories that have come out over the last couple of years, and even recently listening to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, which I don't know if you guys have engaged, it's so easy to slip into this posture of self-righteousness where you think, oh gosh, those people are so dumb. If I had been there, I would have been standing up and shouting to the hilltops about how abusive this culture was, or how toxic this leader was, or whatever it might be. And of course, that's naive. And there is such an easy temptation to be duped or to slip into not perceiving what's really in front of us. And going back now to Jean Vanier, how have you guys processed that discovery of this person you look to as a mentor, as a sage, as an example of the way of the lamb rather than the way of the dragon? How have you dealt with the truth that's come out about a part of his life none of us knew about?
Yeah, no, Sky, that is a profoundly difficult one. And I think, I think what Mike Cosper has done with the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill has been really interesting in this regard, actually. And I know there's been different sides of this. I've actually been surprised how great of a job I think he's done at balancing out. I mean, the amount of stories of, Driscoll was buying groceries for all these single moms. And like the realization that these things are just messy, right? It's easy to just demonize someone. And with Vanier, I think the hardest part for me personally has been, and I think the only other one of these scenarios that is like it is with Ravi Zacharias, I would say, where I think I had even bought in, even though our book actually does something very different than this. It's interesting. Like in my subconscious, I still had bought in to this kind of cliche modeling of this stuff. And it's the person, rock star celebrity type, narcissist, looking for, a platform everywhere he goes. And then you meet them and right away you can tell this is just a shallow human being.
Right.
But that wasn't, I didn't know Ravi well, but I had met him on a handful of occasions. Like, he just wasn't that. And Vanier wasn't that. I still think his book on community is the greatest thing ever penned on community. It's astonishing. And that really rocked me and us, I'm sure, in some ways of wow, like, it really is wolves in sheep's clothing, and the sheep's clothing is thick at times. And we can't just abide by these cliches. And it actually caused us to go back to Scripture and really sit with, how does Scripture talk about discerning these things? And one of the things that kind of struck us anew when we were writing the new portion was, take a book like James, for instance. James talks about how to discern people in the way of the Lamb based on how they use their speech. And that's really interesting, actually. And, you go back and you listen to some of the earlier things of Ravi and, some of the claims he had made about his education that turned out not quite to be true. These things that appear like subtle. And I think particularly in the age of social media where we basically don't think speech says anything about you anymore, where bearing false witness is just the kind of normal Twitter account. That's just kind of things we just do. That a lot of the things Scripture tried to train us in to discern these things that we had just kind of missed. And so the process we took has been a hard one. I mean, I mentioned earlier, we went through these phases where we were racking our brains trying to think like we should have seen something in his eyes, when we're sitting in his den. We should have felt something. We should have. And the realization that at times these things can't be, like, even at the greatest amount of discernment, like there's people who have, I think, hidden evil so deeply within them, and they've been warped by it. And it is such a deep kind of primal now part of them that they've learned not to have any kind of tells. And I think the problem that we face today is very different. Like, I think it is scary when you run into someone like that with Vanier, because you're thinking like, wow, can we ever tell? I think he is the anomaly. I think the bigger problem is that we have not at all begun a sense of how have we as a community even tried to discern how evil can warp leaders. Like, that's not even a conversation we even have.
Right.
And so I think we need to start with our hearts, as Jamin said, but then also discernment of, what would it look like to even be able to discern some of these things, and how can we really give ourselves to those tasks?
Yeah, what you're pointing out here is something that's been troubling me, and I haven't had language for it exactly, but it feels to me like an awful lot of us in the evangelical church, we don't even have the discernment to recognize a wolf when the wolf is in wolf's clothing. Like, we don't recognize the wolf when he's got a name tag that says, "Hello, my name is Wolf." Like, we don't see it, let alone the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Totally.
So yeah, Vanier probably does epitomize the sheep's clothing, right? Where everything on the outside that you can perceive and discern on a surface level looks really good. And it's only if you got super deep into the subterranean levels of a person's soul and character that you see that hidden evil. And unfortunately, there were women who saw that side of him. But most of us didn't. But there are so many in Christian leadership who are just flat out wolves. And yet our subculture has redefined what's good and bad to actually identify wolf-like qualities as good and godly.
Yeah.
So, and that's what at least the first edition of your book seemed to do really well at pointing out, is we have so warped our understanding of what is good and what godly power looks like that we can't even tell the difference anymore. Do you think there's been any progress on that front?
Wow. Well, as you were talking, what was striking me was, I think so often, maybe to say it really simply, we are looking for wolves. Like, we're actually seeking out wolves to be our leaders, and so the challenge of discernment begins with a recognition that the very qualities of kind of control or domination, self-aggrandizement that ought to be markers of kind of warning lights on the dashboard are actually at times when the evangelical church culture kind of beacons of light drawing us near, like, oh, that's the kind of leaders we want. And I think you're right, Skye. There's a needing to begin there. Maybe tethered to your question then is a recognition that I do think a lot of the stories, the kind of more publicized and documented stories of the last few years, I do think perhaps have opened our eyes a bit more. I am encouraged by the kinds of conversations I have with folks now in the church, and within my church as a pastor, but just more broadly, I think just the sheer number of leaders and the kind of intensity of those stories. Well, I mean, you've mentioned several, but of course there's others. What happened with Tully Intervision and many other names. And I think one of the realities of those stories is the kind of toxicity of leadership hasn't been siloed to one particular tribe within evangelicalism. And so, because I think some of our propensity is to go, see, this is what happens at those big seeker-sensitive megachurches. Or see, this is what happens with those reformed kind of pastors. Or see, this is what happens with those guys that are leaning towards kind of what seems like maybe more progressive value. Well, the challenge with the stories of the last few years is yes to all the above. Right? And I think what that has done, maybe by God's grace, has actually forced us collectively as kind of the evangelical church culture to reckon with, boy, this is kind of a problem across the board. And there's so many examples, and I can't just kind of push it into that corner or push it over to that tribe. Well, I'm not part of that group. And so I would say that I am encouraged, actually. I think there's a more honest, sober-minded conversation. And maybe one part of that really encourages me is some of what I sensed in the way our book was initially received that did concern me was, oh, yes, you guys are finally talking about these failed leaders and how we've got to really identify them and root them out the church. Or these celebrity pastor types, we've really got to deal with that problem. What I see happening with more and more of these stories of failed leaders and maybe even some celebrity pastors is this recognition that, well, maybe the problem isn't just the leaders. Maybe the problem isn't just celebrity pastors, but it's actually the church, broadly speaking. It isn't just these tribes. It isn't just these leaders. It's kind of us. And what does that mean? And I mean, I think there's much more conversation to be had about what that means. But I am really encouraged because I think that's where the conversation has moved. And I think that's, to Kyle's point, maybe where some of the Mars Hill podcasts that I think is being listened to a lot right now, at least by people that I'm connected to in my own church and more broadly. That's where I sense some of the conversation is moving. What has gone on that has caused us to gravitate towards these kind of leaders, that has caused us to maybe embrace certain virtues that's made this kind of culture within a church possible? So there is real hope. And maybe the last thing I'll say is I am having conversations more and more and more, and I'll speak as a pastor here, with younger pastors who are younger than me, going, boy, I don't want to end up there. And I think pastors who are also maybe beginning to see in their own heart what Kyle and I saw as we began to write this book the first time, which is, if I'm honest, boy, I think those temptations are there for me too. And I can't just easily go, I would never be like Driscoll, or I'd never be like Ravi, or I'd never be like Tolian, or I'd never do what happened with James McDonald. I think more and more young pastors that I'm having conversations with are realizing, the temptations are there. I could see how they would get there. And I need to begin having a real honest conversation about what that means. So I am encouraged, actually, by where I feel like I see the conversation shifting, that there actually is a conversation and there's some honesty that's showing up and some humility showing up on the part of people in the church and on the part of young pastors.
Yeah, I agree. I'm having more of those conversations as well. It feels like a lot of this stuff this is a oversimplification, but can be dumped into sort of two categories. There's the category of those who suffer from significant character flaws or temptations, which we all have on certain levels, right? And then there's the category of a church culture that creates an environment in which the wrong things are affirmed and celebrated. When I think of Vanier, I think of somebody who inhabited a culture that, at least from a distance, didn't appear to me to be toxic. It wasn't a culture of celebrity and power and grandiosity or any of that stuff. But it's clear looking back now that he had some inner character demons that were deeply residing within him. But then there's other stories of failure and downfall where it feels like it's a combination. Yeah, there's a leader involved here who has clear character problems, but they were also within a culture that exacerbated that and celebrated a lot of those things. And so when we're having these conversations, it's appropriate to talk to an individual pastor about, wow, how am I tempted? What are my character flaws? But we also need to look at the culture and
Yeah.
the broader systems that we inhabit that bring out the wrong things in us. Okay, getting back to the story and journey you guys have been on since Vanier's story came out, how have you learned to minister to people who also feel like they've been deceived and hurt by leaders who turned out to be wolves in sheep's clothing? Has that impacted your own ministries in a way that you are empathetic toward those who've been in these ministries or led by people that turned out to be not who they thought they were?
Yeah, no, Sky, this has been, there's been several surprises since the original book came out. And one of the most shocking to me, in one way, I mean, another way, it probably isn't that shocking when I thought about it, but the sheer amount has been surprising, where the most common response I hear from students, so I'm a seminary professor, so my students, when they read the book, the most common response I hear from them is, "You've described my pastor perfectly. What do I do?" To a T. I mean, it is astonishing. And to Jamin's point earlier, I think I am encouraged by a lot of the conversation, but I think what our book has tried to do that isn't being done, and that we have really given, in many ways, our life to now, we're saying for the next several decades, this is what we want to push the church on and really try to force the church to grapple with, is people just aren't asking about power. Like, what is power and how does it work? We'll talk about narcissistic leaders, or we'll talk about toxic cultures, and all those things are good. We need to talk about those, and it's really encouraging to me we are. But beneath all of that is a vision of power. And so when I meet these students, again, quite regularly, a lot of what I'm trying to do is lead them into, first, okay, let's just talk about kind of how you've internalized this. Like, how has this leader hurt you? How is, where are you struggling? And what does it mean? We have an expression in the book that we pick up called non-divisive resistance. Obviously picking up from kind of nonviolent resistance. Like, well, what does it mean? Because we're supposed to bear witness to the kingdom against the powers and the principalities of this age. And so we're not just talking about bad leadership style. We're talking about cultures and leaders who have embraced a way of power that aligns itself to the demonic. Right? That's what James 3 names explicitly. And we have to just say it as it is. The world, the flesh, and the devil are these intertwined realities. And therefore, we have to bear witness against it. But in the church, we have to bear witness non-divisively. And for a lot of folks, I find, particularly my students, a lot of them just need care. Sometimes I'm going to say, if you can't resist non-divisively, you need to leave and not resist. Actually, the temptation we have, that I see all too often, is to respond in kind. And that is just abiding by the same powers that we're seeking to undermine. It reminds me of, Martin Luther King Jr. would say, you can't resist nonviolently if you hate someone in your heart, right? And we have that problem in our hurt. And so quite a lot of what we attempt to lead people into are caring for them explicitly, trying to help them kind of navigate the realities that they've experienced, while also prayerfully engaging, how have I abided by these things? It's a hard balance, because I'm going to treat someone who's been directly abused very differently than someone who, like we're talking about, that had maybe a toxic leader. And so there's obviously people that we're going to say, look, we need to separate you from the abuser. We need to find you immediate care. And then a person who, like, let's say with Ravi Zacharias, I mean, I meet students all the time who've been so devastated. They've never met him, but he has played such a fundamental role in their narrative. And now it's, okay, we need to get a place where we can name the good he's done. We need to narrate a little bit of maybe kind of the role he's played in an unhealthy way in your own experience, like this kind of idolizing these people and perfecting them in our imagination, all the things that can happen with the quote unquote kind of celebrity types. And then with Vanier, that's been hard for us. Like I, I still have his books on my shelf, and I see them, and I still feel this kind of twinge in me whenever I see them. I want to throw them away, but there's a part of me that says, he is still profoundly right about a lot of what he gave himself to. And we never felt that with our book. Like, we knew we had to yank it because we knew those women are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people that have been abused at his hands. And like, there's no way we can somehow have a book out there that is still kind of using him as a model. That there's just no way we could have done that. But yet at the same time, to your point earlier, like, there are parts of him, particularly the more intellectual parts, that are still profound. And I think navigating those things can be quite difficult.
Go ahead, Jamin.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing I would add to what Kyle just shared is, I think our own journey and how we experienced the revelation of Vanier's abuse really surfaced for Kyle and I some pretty like core temptations in those moments that I think are pretty common for people. And that for me has really helped pastorally. And maybe just to name a couple of them. I mean, one is, I was really tempted to just roll it over in my mind, replay the interactions, go back over the transcript of our conversation. What did I miss? Kind of mentally navigate and kind of problem solve. And in so much of that, to never go to God in prayer. And so I think the first thing I would really want to name for people is draw near to the Lord in the truth of your heart. And I think these are places where I think particularly in evangelicalism, we have collectively probably a lament long overdue in prayer. We have imprecation long overdue. These just aren't well-worn paths for us in prayer. At least they haven't been often in my kind of upbringing within evangelicalism. I wasn't taught always how to lament, pray the Psalms of lament. I wasn't taught how to actually pray the Psalms of imprecation. Well, man, these are uncomfortable Psalms. We're praying for God's judgment and condemnation upon the wicked. And flip to the next one was often my response. But I think as I think about those two forms of prayer that are demonstrated to us in Scripture, and I think where God's inviting us to pray that way and then through the Psalms, these are moments in people's lives where they need to turn to the Lord in prayer, and they need to lament, and they need to pray, Lord, would you bring down judgment? Would you exact justice? As I think one of the real temptations is to kind of stick in our head with it and problem solve and mull it over. And so often when I'm in these conversations with folks, my first question is, how have you experienced the Lord in this? What might it look like to talk to God about your anger and your hurt and your sorrow? How have you experienced him in that as you've talked to him about that? And then I think the second temptation that really showed up for us with the book, and of course we have a unique opportunity. We got to write another chapter in a second edition of a book about this. The truth is, honestly, Sky, I think Kyle and I felt like we wanted to do more. We've got to publish an article right away. We got to publish multiple articles. We've got to write a new book about it. It's how do we solve this problem? And I think some of that impulse is good. We want to do something about it. We want to be, for lack of using a cliche, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Right? We want to do something about it. But I think, again, there is a temptation in that. I think one of the things a lot of people feel is I've got to do something. I've got to, and doing something means doing something big and public that makes a statement where it gets people's attention. And the reality is, often we don't really have an opportunity to do that, even if we wanted to. But B, sometimes that's really not actually a healthy thing for us in our own process of healing, maybe even reconciling in certain relationships, maybe even honoring the confidentiality of others involved in a circumstance we might be in. And so I think one of the things that we really learned through that temptation, I think is helpful for people, is a reminder that the way to respond is to embrace God's power in our own weakness. And more often than not, that looks like the little and the hidden. This is the meat and potatoes of kingdom work, is the little and the hidden. And what does it mean to begin showing up in the truth of our own temptations with power in our own communities and confessing that with brothers and sisters in Christ that we're in a small group with? What does it mean to intercede in the quietness of our own prayer closet on behalf of others that we see have been hurt by a leader, and to really kind of with hospitality of heart hold those people's experience in our heart and pray in secret and in quiet for them consistently, right? I know these things for us don't sound like doing enough, right? But for those of us that believe God is the one that is needed in this, that his presence is what's going to bring transformation and healing, these acts of little hidden kind of faithfulness in embracing his way, that's where the action is. So anyway, those are maybe pieces I would add that I think have been helpful for people. Like, what does it mean to be with the Lord in this? And what does it mean to embrace the little hidden way of responding in faithfulness?
I'm glad you say that, because you and I all have heard stories of people who've felt very betrayed and hurt by a leader that they had entrusted, and the truth comes out and their devastation unfolds. And for so many people, their only instinct is, well, I need to turn away from God completely now, because the person who kind of mediated God's presence to me turned out to be a hypocrite or a sham or whatever. And your words, Jamin, are important, because you point out that our faith actually equips us with the means of dealing with that kind of emotion, that sense of betrayal, the lament, the pain and struggle. It's all over the scriptures, both in the stories that are told about very flawed people, as well as the Psalms, which articulate brokenheartedness to God over unfairness and injustice and betrayal. And I mean, it's all over the place. And so, as painful as they are, these are moments that we can grow more intimate in our communion with God and learn to trust him more, and perhaps the people around us in a different way.
Yeah.
I am grateful that you guys have modeled wisdom in taking your book and revising it and updating it. We are all a work in process, and the output of your lives is evident in the fact that you're updating and revising The Way of the Dragon or The Way of the Lamb. So if you guys haven't read it yet, I can't recommend this book enough, even more now in the second edition. So go check it out. Kyle Strobel, Jamin Goggin, thank you for being with us again. And we'll put a link in the show notes so people can get a copy of this book and do that work of searching in their own hearts of which path they're really on. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Guy.
Thanks, Guy.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.